Diet Pepsi.
Little product placement there. I actually didn't even know you had that, which is sort of funny.
That is.
It makes for a good intro.
Shall I start?
Yeah, why don't you start today? I feel like I
don't think you
lift so
started.
much of the weight around here, and I think it's time that you just pick it up, a little bit.
Honestly, Ryan, I'm tired. I'm tired of you.
That's okay. It's okay. You can get out of the backpack that I've been carrying you in.
Go
and
plan bridal showers for the rest of your life.
Hello and welcome to the Chaffin Church podcast. This is episode number 8.
8.
I can't believe we've even lasted this long with a guy like this around. Figured this would have been like the Hindenburg.
Was that some sort of bust? Like for real?
I thought that was the theme of our intro today.
Well, the theme was this. You, off camera, or maybe it was on camera, told me to start, and then you started.
And then I did it.
You're just full of initiative.
I am. I'm full of initiative and sass. I'm very sassy today. It's true. You all know it.
You know, Sir Ryan Thompson, full of sass. And that's where we're going from. Hey, welcome to the Chaffin Church podcast. What a fantastic start. And we're thankful that you have joined us. It's going to be a good time today. We have a lot to talk about. We're going to start a new series, 3 or 4 weeks, on the history of Chaffin Church and how that interacts with the city at large. Is this a city or a town? I think it's a town.
It is a town.
The town at large. We're not quite at that 16,000. I think you have to have 16,000 to be a city.
I think Holden has 18,000 now.
Maybe we should do our research before
I think we would have to reincorporate as a city, though. There's a lot to it, but
okay.
Yeah.
Town Manager Lukes, you got this. We believe in you. Anyways, so things are almost back to normal. I discovered that this last weekend. Ryan, you seem to have had, I saw on social media, not your account, of course. You seem to have had a good time this weekend. Tell us a little bit about what you did.
Yeah, so Sunday was my sister's bridal shower, which I helped to plan, which is not typically something that a male human being would do, but I did it because I am full of, what were the 2 adjectives used earlier? Sass and...
I feel like I should shut my mouth in every way possible.
And initiative. Those are the 2 words, initiative and sass.
Yes.
Definitely me. Yeah, so that was good. I wasn't actually there for the event. We did do some pictures at the beginning, but then my dad and I and my sister's fiance and his dad went out for lunch, and so we were all hanging out while all the ladies were doing that.
Now let's dig into that a little bit.
Sure.
In-laws and all that. Was that a good time? Was that awkward at all?
No, I'm very fortunate. I really like my sister's fiance. He's a great guy, and his dad's pretty cool too.
Where did they meet? Online?
My sister and well, they met. Was it? Yeah, it was online. I'm sorry. Yes, it was online. Yeah, on I think it was Match.com or eHarmony. No, it was Match.
Oh, nice. Yep. Okay, so you went to lunch. They had a good time. Did you do anything else on the weekend? Because my weekend was so busy, and there's a reason why I'm asking this question in general.
Yeah, nothing else. Super social, I would say. Yeah.
So Friday night, I had a family gathering right up the road here with my in-laws and had a great time. We had some tacos.
Ooh.
And guacamole. Ray Rogers, who plays the bass here at the church, he knows how to make guacamole. Anyways,
what? I don't think I've ever eaten Ray's guacamole, but I just believe that.
Yeah.
When you say that, I feel like Ray would make good guacamole.
I mean, whatever he does well.
Yes.
And of course, guacamole is one of those things. And Saturday was loaded with a lot of good things. It was just beautiful. And I would say, correct me if I'm wrong, that this was the first beautiful, entirely beautiful weather weekend that we had here in Holden, Massachusetts.
It was nice.
And so Saturday, I hung out with the family, my family. We worked on the yard and had a great time. And then Sunday, my wife wanted me to go to a birthday party after church. Had a great time at church. And I went to the party, and I walked. It was in the backyard. I walked through the garage. My wife was already there. And I walked down, mostly of people I didn't know. I knew like 3 or 4 families, including your ex-girlfriend. I don't know why I just remembered that. I don't even know why it's relevant, but I feel like maybe I shouldn't have said that.
I mean, we could edit out and post, or maybe because we're both sassy now, we'll leave it.
And initiative-based.
Yes, initiative and sass.
I walked down, and everyone was maskless. And like, as somebody who, I wouldn't say like I'm like a hardcore Republican on the subject of masks. I was probably more lenient, well, moderate. I call myself a moderate, and that's pretty much where I landed. So, in most things. So I walked down, and it kind of took my breath away, ironically, as I went down, and everyone, and the hostess of the birthday party, the mother, who I know, gave me a huge hug, and like, because I didn't have time, there was nobody asking questions, I looked out and saw Carrie, who is way more intense about masks, without a mask. And I'm like, must be okay. Like I had no idea. I didn't get to ask any questions, but there we were. And I think people are just opening up the floodgates here on masks. The CDC, of course, made their big announcement.
Yeah.
And
it is interesting, like the CDC makes their big announcements, and then it just feels like every news outlet has to come out with an article from some epidemiologist that we've never heard of, right? And they're all saying something that is like slightly different, in response to it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's what has to happen, right? They have to find creative ways around. It's really weird because before it was Fox News doing that.
Right. Well, and I guess that's part of the way we come to a public consensus on things. So I think that's healthy, but I mean at the same time, it is. It's just interesting. Just interesting. But I am happy. I'm the same way. At the bridal shower, even taking pictures outside beforehand.
Yeah.
There were several of us not wearing masks at any one given time, and that was like, wow, this is really just. It feels odd, but in a good way.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I hope to have more of it. I mean, right after that, I went to yet another, which was a 4th social thing, which is like nothing for me, as we talked about last week. But for my wife, she was like really tired, and we went to another cookout for that lasted until 8 p.m. and it was a blast. And once again, it was maskless. Those are people I knew, and I knew the scenario, so I was a little less like nervous.
Right.
So, anyways, the world is opening up.
Yes.
And I don't know. Maybe we'll have to come back to a conversation on what it looks like to be normal, or even should we go back to normal in certain ways.
Yeah, well, we
like
talked
schedule.
about that a few weeks ago,
Yeah.
on the podcast. But yeah, I think with the new information, right? I think we're going to need to keep revisiting this. So I think that's a really good point. Yeah.
We're headed to the family reunion now, and we're going to talk over the next several weeks about the history of Chaffin Church. And we are blessed here to have a church historian, one who has just recently resigned because she probably is the age where one should resign these things. She's 98. And Ann Alt has done an amazing job. She's been here at Chaffin Church since 1951. And since 1961, I believe, she has captured the hearts of Chaffinites with her history and done much of the history of the church. And so a lot of the information that we're going to share with you over the next several weeks, and we'll talk through, was information that she has researched, that she has gone through and visited and revisited. She has been part of, so 1951 when she got here, with her and her husband Neil, that was the church's 48th anniversary. So she was there for the 50th, for the 75th, for the 100th, and Lord willing, she will be with us for the 125th. I think that's coming up in, doing the math, in 2028.
Okay.
So we'll celebrate there. Be a big old celebration. But the first quarter of Chaffin Church today. Imagine, if you will, an area in between, I'm going to call it downtown Holden, the 01520, the corner of 31 and Main Street, and Worcester. And that entire area was filled with farmland. And there was a road here, Shrewsbury Street. And I say here because we are sitting in the church auditorium. And a tiny group of people, Swedish people, settled this area. Now, the part in Holden proper, in the town of Center, was mostly taken by English. Of course, we call that, I think there's a plaque there that says the Hancock Common. And that was actually given to Holden by John Hancock.
Really?
True story. And so that was mostly English. And so the Swedish immigrants came from Sweden in the middle 1800s to Worcester. And they worked there for many years and then began to come this direction and grabbed onto many of the farmland and many of the beautiful places here in what is now called Chaffin, the Chaffin area of Holden. At that point, it was called Chaffinville. And so in 1887, many of those Swedish people decided to start a local Christian group. And it's interesting, I actually don't know why this is, but that group was led because they asked this particular man. He wasn't part of the people who said, hey, you should do this, or we need this. But one of the leaders who they asked to come in was a guy named Pastor Eric Ostergren from the Massachusetts Home Missionary Society. And he would come in, he was like an old circuit rider preacher. And he would come in and he would preach on a weekly or bi-weekly basis and preach to this local Christian group of Swedish friends. And the very first Sunday that they were supposed to meet, they were going to meet at the old Chaffin School, which is now the HMLD, the Holden Light Municipal Municipal Light Department. It used to be a school, and they went in there. They were going to meet there, and the janitor, whoever, forgot to light the fires. It was a cold day. Forgot to light the fires, and so a Mr. Jernberg, they don't have a first name here, a Mr. Jernberg of 318 Shrewsbury Street invited them to their house. And that is that way. It's over close to the Emmanuel Lutheran Church here in town. And that's where they had their first gathering. And they met every once in a while. Pastor Ostergren would come and speak. And then in June of 1892, they actually formed a legal organization called the Swedish Christian Workers Association of Chaffin, Holden, Massachusetts. And the point of their organization was to work together in brotherly love to spread the gospel, especially among the Scandinavians in Holden. Any thoughts so far?
Yeah, just want to add just two quick things here. First, so many of these Swedish, particularly Swedish people, but Scandinavians in general, were leaving Scandinavia for typical reasons, right? Economic opportunity.
Yeah.
But there were some of them, and particularly the ones who founded this, the Home Missionary Society, and then the Swedish, I believe it was called the Swedish Mission Friends, were actually sort of fleeing the state church of Sweden, which I won't get too deep into it, but basically Sweden was way back a Catholic nation actually for many years.
Correct.
And that's where Saint Lucia was actually a saint who gave her life to help bring Protestantism into the Catholic.
Oh, wow.
So she was burned alive, hence the candles on the top of the head for Saint Lucia Day. It's a little bit darker than most people think it is.
I was not expecting the burning alive thing.
Yeah, so, but a lot of them fled the state church in Sweden, the Protestant state church in Sweden, because over the years, the state church in Sweden, the Protestant state church in Sweden became more oppressive, kind of came back around, right?
Now, was it Lutheran?
Yeah, so this is the Lutheran, it was a Lutheran denomination, but it was, it was state sponsored.
Correct.
So this, group of people, left Sweden over the many, decades, right? So from the 1860s until the 1920s, this was thousands and thousands of people. Many of them landed either on the East Coast around here, or in the Chicago area, or in Minnesota. Those are the three most popular places.
Interesting.
And so groups like this were sort of popping up all around. And I'll just be very quick here. So there were three sort of phrases that this group of people had. And it was the phrases were kind of tightly related to being against the way the state church in Sweden did things. So one was they called each other mission friends, and you'll probably see that. I'm assuming there might be some of that in here, but they called each other mission friends. Kind of a cute little nickname. I think it's kind of cool. But then they had the two actual phrases they had were "How goes your walk, friend?" Like mission friend, "How goes your walk?" Because in the state church in Sweden, only a priest or a pastor could tell you how your walk was going, right?
Oh, wow.
And
okay.
so it was they were sort of taking back this liberty, and then the other one was, where is it written, right? Because once again, in the state church in Sweden, it's not that you couldn't read the Bible, but you needed a pastor or a priest to help interpret it for you. And therefore, in the state church in Sweden, you could not have a meeting to study the Bible together without a pastor there. And so they would say things like, how goes your walk, and where is it written? And these were friendly terms too. They weren't like, if you're going to say something, it's going to be a gotcha. Where's it written?
Yeah.
It's not like that. It's like more of like this statement of healthy rebellion, and their church and their faith community was evolving. So
I really love that. As a matter of fact, it puts an interesting, I'm going to say spin, but I don't mean it in the public relations way. Mm-hmm. It puts an interesting spin on the idea that there is definitely a connection as we go on between Chicago and the Chaffin community.
And
here.
they met in Mr. Jernberg's house, right?
Yeah.
Again, you can't do that in Sweden. You're not allowed unless there's a pastor there. So the fact they're meeting not in this official state-sanctioned location, so yeah, there's a lot of cool little nuggets there. Sorry for...
No, that's okay. That's great. So this group of people, they purchased this property that Ryan and I are currently sitting in. And of course, there's a few groups actually meeting here now. We're able to meet here, this church, because this group of people decided to purchase this property in 1893.
It's a good year.
And then...
It's a good year.
Was it?
It was.
So another thing about this year is I read recently, and I've told you this before, and I still can't find the connection, but I'm going to find it. We just talked about the connection between Chicago and a lot of the Swedes in Chicago. Well, there was a pastor from this area, or he was born in this area. He wasn't a pastor. His name was D.L. Moody, Dwight L. Moody, and he moved to Chicago, was a shoe salesman, then became a pastor, and his big thing was a Sunday school union. Okay, so remember this. They didn't form. They formed a Swedish Christian Workers Association. So he went to Chicago and built this huge ministry in Chicago. Well, it became so big. He basically was a precursor to Billy Sunday. So he went to Europe, to England specifically, and he met Charles Spurgeon and the guy who, Booth, the guy who started the Salvation Army, and George Mueller, who we've talked about years ago. And he met those guys, and then he started speaking before England, and it kind of just took off. But he never went to Sweden, but there was a note in his biography that Sweden was particularly affected, and maybe it's because of what you were talking about, by his teaching. And so tracts were shared when he spoke in the roughly the 1860s, late 1860s, 1870s. Tracts were shared all through Sweden, and they called it the Moody fever. Moody fever. And so then he moved back to this area about an hour away from here. And he started Sunday schools and started mission organizations. And so all of a sudden, all these Swedish people are coming in this area. I always wondered if it wasn't a direct connection to Moody. Anyways, they built the chapel in 1895. And so that's when this building that we are sitting in was built. And it didn't look like this at all, but it was much less, I guess, decorative, depending on your point of view. And then in 1896, Anna and August Pearson were the first couple to be married in the chapel. And their pictures are also on the front along. I'm not sure which one is Anna and which one is. There's a group of 12 to 15 guys and a group of 12 to 15 females, and they get their pictures taken, but not together. They're separate, men and women. And anyway, so in 1902, the group decided to form a church. So I don't know. This is interesting. I don't know if this was something that happened, like you started a club first, essentially, or a Christian Association, Workers Association, and then you started the church, if that was something that happened. But for whatever reason, approximately a decade after they first formed, they formed the church, and they incorporated on November 7th, 1903, and called the church, ready? The Scandinavian Evangelical Congregational Church of Holden, Massachusetts. So we have a heavy Swedish history here. I am not Swedish, but you are.
I am. I'm half Swedish, yeah.
You're half Swedish. And the history says that they had lots of picnics, and they had a 4th of July picnic every year. And here was an interesting fact. They had a stained glass. They had stained glass in this building. In 1895, when they built it, but it was replaced with clear glass in 1915. It's kind of like most people won't replace stained glass, right? Like, it's today they're like, no,
Yeah, there's something sacred about it.
They're like, they go MC Hammer on you. Can't touch this.
Exactly. Well, yeah, I mean, that's how many things are in churches, you know, the traditions. Oh,
It's
hold
true.
on to that stuff.
We're big traditionalists.
Right.
But we do love our history. And so the first pastor was John Nelson. And John Nelson was from Chicago Theological Seminary. Have you heard of that place?
I have.
You have? Is it still in existence?
I believe it does still exist. It's very small, but it does still exist.
All right. Well, he was the first pastor, but he only was the pastor in 04 and 05. So they would bring in, during the school year, they would bring in laymen from Worcester or pastors who were circuit riding pastors kind of thing. And those people led the services, except that in the summers, John Nelson from Chicago Theological Seminary. And then the Reverend John Quist, who was a retired covenant minister. He was a pastor from 1918 to 1922. And that's important because that was the first time that the church really stabilized and began to grow. Not huge, but it began to kind of take off and get some legs on it. Now, what's interesting is, once again, he was a covenant minister. That is a part of the Evangelical Covenant Church, who Ryan knows very well.
Yes, because I currently work for that denomination. So they have survived for some time now.
Yeah.
And so then there were just so you know, so there were two covenant churches in Worcester. And I believe they started, late 1800s, early 1900s, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
So Salem Covenant Church was first. Salem Covenant Church is right by Worcester Country Club.
Yeah.
And then there was Bethlehem Covenant Church, which was planted out of Salem Covenant Church. And that was on Greenwood Street in Worcester, which is right behind the Walmart there on 146, which is where I grew up going to church.
Correct.
That's where the connection is there for me. But sadly, Bethlehem closed their doors in 2015. So.
And now that's the Journey Church.
Yes, they're building, and they, so the people merged with Salem Covenant Church, and then Journey Church bought the Bethlehem Covenant Church building, and so it's still being used as a church building.
Okay, so that brings us to 1922, and in 1922 the church was about just a little over a quarter of a century old in terms of when they started as meeting as a group. And so that's the first 25 years of Chaffin history. A lot of Swedish goodness, a lot of good people. What's interesting, and maybe we'll have to do some research on why this is, there's not a ton of history about this. There's what Anne has written and what we have, and so we're blessed to have that. But I couldn't find a lot of artifacts like in the church history closet or whatever. There was not a ton. And so, anyways, I've looked. One of the things I found is that your denomination, like the ECC, currently is one of the fastest growing denominations in America. I didn't know that.
We are, and this shirt that I'm wearing, Start Strong, Lead Well, and as Marty, you can see on the back, it says Covenant Church Planting.
Yeah.
So Covenant churches are, so literally during the pandemic, we planted 28 churches. So last year during the pandemic, planted 28 churches. So
wow.
28 churches across the United States and Canada during a pandemic and challenging economic times. So it's just very, very interesting. And of course we're growing very quickly in non-white demographics, which is also interesting because historically we have been a Swedish denomination, and so very, very sort of focused on the social justice aspects. But yeah, you could read up on that. Covchurch.org. There's a whole history page there. You can read up on some of the history of the Evangelical Covenant Church. I think it's kind of interesting. Just for our viewers / listeners here. So why are we doing this? Why are we talking about the history? Like, what is the not just the interesting part of it, but what is like the practical use of this?
So I would say that the practical use is twofold. First of all, I have always lived with the idea that those who don't learn from history are condemned to repeat it, right? And so I don't want to live in the history of Chaffin Church. In other words, I don't think we go back to 1955, which we'll learn maybe next week, about a significant group of events that happened there. We don't go back to 1903 and live the way they did then. We live in our own context of what God is doing here in Holden right now. That's where, however, there are things certainly we can learn. I mean, we can learn, when I grew up in history, right? You learn about the Revolutionary War, and you learn about the Civil War, and you learn about all these wars, and you learn about all these things that happened. I love history. It's my favorite. And I think you learn that, but you don't sit there. Right? It's important to learn because you need to know this is where this place came from. But once again, not because we need to go back there, because we don't. Just being honest. Like as a church, we want to move forward. We're thankful for the past. We're thankful for Anna and August Pearson and their family members and the groups of people around here who started this awesome church and took off with it, who had the foresight to build this place right here where now 15,000 cars a day go by, right? Amazing. However, we don't sit there. Secondly, I think the reason is because this area is part of a larger community. We're part of a larger community. Right? And that larger community is Chaffin, and that even larger community is Holden, right? And the even larger community is Worcester County. Well, how do we fit in historically, right? Not all churches have that benefit, right? If you plant a church, which is great, like to plant a church, I think it's great, but you don't have that benefit to say, we have been a part of this greater community. There are not too many people that I talk to, young or old, who haven't stepped foot in this building for something. Right? Like, oh yeah, I was there for a play, or I was there for some sort of musical concert, or I was there for a Girl Scout meeting, or this or that. And that means that this church has done a lot of things right. And so we want to continue to be a part of the greater community. And so as we think about the history, we're able to consider this is they put this right here, and a lot of cars went by here, a lot of people. This church grew to a membership of almost 400 people at its peak. And so Ryan can attest to this. You're looking at the building, you're looking at like 400 people is filling this place out, right? Like,
it's a lot of people.
It's a lot of people in this room. And so I just think it's important for us to know and to be able to understand we are part of a larger community here that God has given us to serve. And so.
Yeah, right on. I mean, just to echo part of what you said, one thing that we said in Covenant Church Planting when I worked for Covenant Church Planting specifically in the ECC for 3 years. Now I work in IT, but they would say, one of the phrases they would say is every church has a birthday. And so, and even when churches would would die, right? And they would give up their finances, and the process in our denomination is they would give up their finances back into planting more churches. So one church dies, 5 more pop up, right? And so when we say every church has a birthday, and then you can become a legacy church, but when you say something like every church has a birthday, there's a lot in between now and when that birthday happened, right?
Yeah.
And whether you go to Chaffin Church or whether you're just a member of the community in Holden or somewhere else in Worcester County, I believe this church somewhere along the line has affected you or someone you know. So that's sort of why we're doing this.
That's good. Every church has a birthday. Speaking of which, Ryan, happy birthday to the church as a whole, because today is the first day of Pentecost, which is the birthday, considered the birthday of the church in the church calendar. So the church is old, and the older you get, the more set in your ways you become. At least that's how I feel sometimes, right? But when you celebrate a birthday, you can and probably should get sentimental and futuristic. We've been talking about this, right? We shouldn't just stay in the past of where we were. God is bringing us somewhere. And so we want to celebrate the birthday this week. And yeah, Pentecost, right? It's a time of extreme change. And we're about to read this, I'm assuming. Yeah.
But I hear people talking about Pentecost and they're always like looking back, like, oh, we need to do church the way that they were doing things in the book of Acts. And I mean, some of that, yes, but it's almost like the promise of Pentecost is that we're a part of an ever-changing
that's good.
organization, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's funny you say that. I was just on the phone with a friend who, as probably one of my oldest friends, not my oldest friend, but we were talking, and he just got on the board of his church. And within a week, one of their small groups has gone rogue.
Oh.
But not in a we hate this church way. They just have decided they're going to become, during COVID, their own micro church.
Oh.
Right? And so here is 2 distinct philosophies now taking place. But the truth is, they're the same church. It's the same church. God has propelled the church in ways that we can use our imagination, and that there is no, at least in Protestantism, there is no pope, right? That's dictating that's we fall under, the individual priesthood of the believer, and we're kind of moving forward, accountable to one another.
Right.
And so, as you said, we're going to read this. Would you like to read this?
Sure.
This passage?
Sure, I can read this. Okay, this is Acts 2:14 through 21. Then Peter stepped forward with the 11 other apostles and shouted to the crowd, "Listen carefully, all of you, fellow Jews and residents of Jerusalem. Make no mistake about this. These people are not drunk, as some of you are assuming. 9 o'clock in the morning is much too early for that." Oh, interesting. I forgot about that. No, what you see was predicted long ago by the prophet Joel. "In the last days," God says, "I will pour out my spirit upon all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your young men will see visions, and your old men will dream dreams. In those days I will pour out my spirit, even on my servants, men and women alike, and they will prophesy. And I will cause wonders in the heavens above and signs on the earth below, blood and fire and clouds of smoke. The sun will become dark, and the moon will turn to blood red before that great and glorious day of the Lord arrives. But everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved."
And then Peter goes into this incredible idea of the gospel of Jesus, and he shares that. Now, another thing about this story is, Scripture says that they were talking to one another, and everyone in every language understood them. So there was something incredible taking place, and the church was birthed here in this kind of miraculous setting. And Peter preaches, he prophesies, and I believe that day 3,000 people came to know Jesus. Now, what this really means, think about this. The setting is like there is this group of people who are saying Jesus walked around, and then he was killed, he was crucified after he was mercilessly beaten. Oh, and by the way, then he raised from the dead. And 3,000 people in one shot believe that. Like, that's amazing in a Roman Empire that pretty much worshipped Caesar and all these other gods. And they were saying, no. Jesus is God. Jesus is Lord. He has risen from the dead. Put your belief in them, and there is salvation in him, and there is salvation in that. And so that is the birth day of the church. And so the churches who come behind that then echo those words, maybe in different ways, but ultimately everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. And so Chaffin, we have now been around for 118 years. We've seen amazing growth, right? Up to 360, 70 people was the top membership. We've had devastating decline, which we weren't there for. Hopefully we won't be. And but I wanted to share one lady. I was sitting in Dunkin' Donuts the first couple weeks I was part of Chaffin, and I said, if I take this church, will you stick around? And she said yes. And she said she had been there for 5 years. And she had been a part of some big, I guess, evangelical churches. And so this church was quite different from that at that point. And she came and visited the first time, and she said what typically happens. Let me ask you, do you know what happens like when somebody visits a desperate and dying church? Do you know what happens? Have you seen that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things happen, so you're going to have to be a little more specific. But
well, let's say you were to walk in here when there were only 10 people in the room, and what might those people do to you? Like, how might they talk to you?
Yeah, I mean, so usually it's either one of two things, right? They're either all going to jump on you and be like, we got to get this person to stay because we're dying. It's an extra person, to help us, keep this life raft afloat. And or the opposite can also be true,
Correct.
Right? Where it's like, who is this loser? Not loser, but like, who is this like interloper? Right.
Right. Why would they be here?
Right. Like, what's
well, the
going
first
on?
thing happened, and
Okay.
And like she said, she walked to the parking lot, and she looked at the church from right over here. And I'm pointing to the major parking lot of the church. I think that's west. And she said, God, I want two things to happen if I stay here, because I know you're kind of calling me here, but I don't really want to be here. So I want two things to happen. I want you someday to bring people to the church. And she said, I don't see it happening, so that's going to be a miracle. And secondly, I want this church to teach the gospel and preach the gospel. And so I like to think that that's what's happening. I like to think that that's what's going on. But we are privileged and able to celebrate not just, in fact, right now is not the birthday of Chaffin Church, but here as we just start the historical segment of Chaffin Church and share that with you, we also want to let you know it is the birthday of the church. And lo, those many years ago, however long it was, I'd have to check out the chosen The new show. Have you seen that, by the way?
I haven't.
I was shocked. I've seen a couple episodes. I was kind of shocked by how good it was. I'm just going to throw that out there. And so, anyways, let's continue to bring the good news of the gospel to the people in this community, just like the Pearsons and the Ostergrens and the Andersons and all the other good Swedish people did here in the late 1800s and early 1900s when this church was started. Let's go to the Chaffin Good News. We got some good stuff. So the Cape Cod Church donated diapers last week. Cape Cod Church is the name of a church, by the way, in Hyannis. And they donated, I'm sorry, it's in East Falmouth.
Oh, okay.
So they donated diapers last week to a baby center on the Cape. So that's the name of the nonprofit organization.
Oh, a baby center.
A baby center.
Okay.
And a baby center serves without judgment the youngest in the community of Hyannis. And of course, that is babies. So they provide diapers. And so they donated 17,762 diapers to a baby center, equaling $5,000. And so that was Pastor Ben Feldot, who we have met 7 years ago this week. On a story we'll probably tell you someday. Have we told that story yet?
We haven't told that story yet.
Okay.
I think we should just tuck that into our back pocket because it's a good story.
Oh, it's coming. All right. So that's good news. And then some birthdays. Chris Griffin turns probably 25 or 26. Great lady. We love you, Chris. You're awesome. And then Pastor Derek Fry of Connect Church. He turns another year older as well. So happy birthday, Pastor Derek and Chris. Only two people that I know of that had, unless it's your birthday.
It is not my birthday.
Yours is in February.
It is.
Boom! Come on,
That's
somebody.
Good. That's good.
All right. So some announcements. Do you have anything you want to announce?
No announcements I can think of. Nope.
We will not bow to sponsors.
For those of you listening to the podcast, Marty is holding up a can of Pepsi in front of the camera right now and making a joke. I think it's pretty funny.
Thank you.
That's a good one.
It was stolen from the movie Wayne's World in the early 1990s.
You shouldn't have told me because I never would have known.
You didn't?
I haven't seen Wayne's World.
They're like, we will not bow to sponsors. No way. And like the camera pans to like a Nike shoes and a Reebok hat and
Oh my
a
goodness.
t-shirt that says some brand. Anyways, not a lot of announcements because we're kind of keeping it sleek here in the house, but here's a couple. Beginning June 3rd, this summer, keep your Thursdays open here at Chaffin and in the greater community. If you're hearing this from the Chaffin community, Holden community, keep your Thursdays open from 6 to 8 because we are going to have what we call community cookouts. And simply this, you bring the meat, any kind of meat for you, and a side dish for your family, and everybody kind of does the same, and we just have a cookout.
And sorry, you said these started in June.
In June 3rd. Okay. So we're just kind of preparing people now. We have nothing in May for the rest of May.
All right.
And that's on purpose. Basically because early May we had those 4 things in a row, quick, and I'm like, yeah, I don't want to live this way.
There you go.
The church schedule might be something we talk about in general.
Yeah. But hey, every other week you get a cookout. It's pretty awesome.
Not every other week. Every week.
I thought you said every other. Okay. Every week. Don't make the same mistake that I did and miss out on some good food or half of the good food.
And then one thing, I'm taking the youth group, the high schoolers, to Chick-fil-A.
Why would you do that?
Because I like food. And specifically, I like Chick-fil-A. And if I'm broke one particular week or whatever, my wife cuts off the wallet, and so I can't like spend money. I know that I have money almost always on my Chick-fil-A app. It's kind of a thing I got going.
Oh, he eats there so much.
I haven't during COVID, except maybe once or twice, to be honest.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or maybe I'm lying.
No sponsorships.
No sponsors. And then, of course, this podcast. We hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have enjoyed presenting it to you. And so if you would, rate it and review it and subscribe to the podcast. Either video or on YouTube, right? We're on Chaffin.church. You can check it out there. Both the app, which you'd have to go on Church Center, which is a whole thing.
It is a whole thing, isn't it?
It is a whole thing. But a lot of people do it. I think
An easy thing, but it's a thing.
it's a thing that I'd have to describe, right? Like,
Why don't you do that? Why don't you just very quickly, 15 seconds or less. Go ahead.
okay.
What do you do?
So you would download the Church Center app, at which time you would put in your zip code. There would probably be several churches there. Amongst them would be Lifesong Church that we've given to. However, you are going to skip Lifesong Church and go to Chaffin Church. There you're going to say, this is my church, and download the app. Bing, bing, bing. You can check out all the podcasts, and you can also give. So if you're interested in giving to the podcast / giving to Chaffin Church, check it out. You can do that at chaffin.church/giving, or the app, which I won't describe anymore because I just did that. Or you can text any giving amount.
And I've been mentioning this every week because many of us just did our taxes, but I will mention it again.
Please.
All of those gifts are fully tax deductible. So keep that in mind because, you know, your tax deadline probably has already passed for most of us, but next year you could get a tax deduction based off of your giving to either, you know, this podcast or the church.
That's good. Well, we're done a little earlier.
52 minutes.
Yeah.
This is a record for us.
Do you have any stories you want to tell? Or
No, I want to end this right now. That's what I want to do. That's what I want to do. I'm going to take the initiative, and I guess it's not really sassy, but it is initiative.
It is a little bit because you said, I want to end this right now. So
It's a little
that
bit
is sassy in
Initiative
some way.
and sass, it describes me well.
It does remind me of a story. So S and I, right? Sass and initiative. So when I was younger, my teacher asked me in upper elementary to write an essay on something. So I wrote out, remember the elementary where you had the lines and the dot in the middle and you wrote on those? So I wrote out the letters. This was not a prank on my part. This is what I really thought I had to do. The letters S and A. So that's your good news for the day. Now go and give some out.
I have no idea what that had to do with anything. What?
It didn't have anything to do with anything.
First of all, S and I was, and then you said S and A.
I know.
What is that?
But won't people be sitting there thinking about it?
They will, and they'll be like, what the
Like,
heck
you
is
could
wrong with this
feasibly
guy?
still have this on the show, and people are still listening to us go, what the heck were you talking about, Mike?
I don't understand.
Just go and give some good news, Ryan.
We're gonna lose stars. Please don't rate us poorly because
Ryan,
because
give
of
out
Marty's.
some good news.
It was a cliffhanger. TV shows do this all the time. Go easy on us.
Much love to you.